All right, welcome to the December edition of the FNC FN'Round table. It's more of a cross table today, just two of us, Mac and myself. So today's topic is all about how you can tackle your nutrition in December. Okay, there's lots of things happening in December. Some people might be a little bit stressed about how to navigate their nutrition. Some people might just go, fuck it, I'm not going to focus on anything to do with nutrition this week. I'm just going to throw in the towel. But what we want to try and get out of this episode and this edition of the round table is to help you, I guess, satisfy and improve your deep health and total health, which we're really big at FNC on promoting with our clients and our audience. It's not just about physical health when it comes to nutrition, all right? Nutrition can improve any and all areas of your life, and it can impact your social, emotional, existential, environmental, economic health, all those kinds of things. And I think this time of year, it's really important to focus on the social and emotional side of things and the role that nutrition has to play in those as well. So Mark and I are going to share a couple of strategies that hopefully you can take away to, again, just find that sweet spot with your diet so you can enjoy yourself, but even like without the stress of feeling like you've overdone it.
Yes, Mr. Joshua, very contentious topic. As we will see on social media throughout the month of December, you'll see some macro coach Steves advising their clients to continue tracking as per normal, and fat loss goals should not wait because there's never a perfect time to do it. And whilst that is true, there are certainly better times than others. And then you see on the other end of the spectrum, don't worry about it. It's just, 1 month of the year or 1 day of the year even, do what you want, blah, 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 blah. Now, I think a bit of a middle road approach is a good idea, but one that isn't just a middle road approach for the sake of it, rather it aligns with your deeper whys or your values and what you're actually wanting to get out of the month of, say, December and, early January. Okay. But right from the get-go, I will say that, just to kind of put a bit more of a hard line stance on it, dedicated fat loss for most people probably isn't a good idea. Like I said, there's never a perfect time for it, but there are better times than others. And as you said at the top of the episode, Joshua, nutrition does a lot of different things. Social, emotional health, it also contributes to those areas. And in the month of December, where maybe, going to have a bit of a holiday, at least towards the end of the month, for most people, and when we're going to be socializing a lot with our friends, but also hang out with our family, and there's going to be a lot of indulgent foods, and we want to share those rich experiences with others. It sort of creates this idea of, well, it's not the best time for fat loss. It's probably the best time for other stuff gain. Social health gain, emotional health gain. So I guess that's where I'll probably start off the conversation, with the idea that, okay, sweet spot, probably not dedicated fat loss. We can get into the tracking thing in a second, but really just kind of eating with a consciousness of what it truly is you want from the month of December and how you would want to be reflecting upon it.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Like, if someone did go, like, I really want to lose fat in December, it's like, it is very, very hard to do so because these meals are quite indulgent. And I think the real negative thing with doing that is that you will feel quite defeated and deflated because you haven't achieved your goal. And you would probably look back negatively on those experiences that you had. Where really, if we just shift our perspective a little bit more and I guess redefine what success looks like in this month, that's going to help us have a better view and relationship with ourselves and with our food as well. So setting appropriate goals is really, really important. Again, what does success look like in the month of December? And that all comes back down to identifying your values and what you want to get out of this month. So what is most important to you and how do you want to live this month? Do you value your physical health? Yes, important. Like, you can still act in alignment with those health-seeking values in regards to physical things. You can still build your meals based on protein and plants. You can work on still having 2 serves of fruit per day, and maybe not sending it every single time you have a drink. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to send it this month the whole time. Like, it's not a 31-day bender, which I think like some people think it might be. But then it makes January that much harder as well because they probably go through this overindulgence phase, this send it phase, and then they go through this massive restriction phase, which which we are also against as well. But I think it all comes back down to focusing on, again, what can you do in this month? So you can still focus on, 3 regular meals and your 2 snacks and your hunger busters, and eating mindfully and slowly, and food selection. You can still focus on those things. So why not focus on what you can do, rather than being so stressed about, oh, I can't control what grandma's going to put in the apple pie, or the tiramisu or the pavlova. Like, I can't control that stuff. Like, don't stress about it. Like, focus on the things that you can control and just try and do a good job with those.
Yes, indeed. Expecting to control those things throughout the month of December. It's either going to be a bit of an uphill battle, considering the prevalence of social occasions and sorry, this is a motorbike. Considering the prevalence of social occasions, and the presence of indulgent foods around your food environment. So setting up those expectations like you usually would have, say, if you were in a dedicated fat loss phase. Like, let's say you were going for fat loss and you decide to continue that through the month of December. Firstly, it's going to be an uphill battle. But then, so if you then actually committed to adhering to those expectations, you're going to suffer consequences in terms of things like social enjoyment, because you're going to have to take some serious sacrifices on, what you can sort of get away with in bunny years, at those occasions. Now, the thing is, if you kind of take a few steps back and you focus on only the things that don't really have much of an effort cost. So, for example, it could be like focusing on plants, trying to be cognizant of portion sizes, trying to implement things like mindful eating and hydration and all these sort of strategies to help with you controlling your intake. You're still going to be able to get a level of calorie control. Is it going to be dedicated fat loss level of control? Maybe not. But does that really matter? And are you going to be worse off for that? No, you'll probably get to January and be like, well, I maintained my weight. I have I had some rich social and family experiences. I'm in a really good place from that perspective. Whereas if you go for fat loss and let's say you actually adhere to it, so yeah, okay, you might be a little bit leaner, but for what? Could fat loss have just waited like another 4 weeks? And you'll probably feel like you've missed out. You might feel a little bit kind of unbalanced, I didn't really have a great time with my friends and family. That's under the assumption that you do adhere to fat loss expectations. If you commit to fat loss expectations but fall short because the social draw and what have you is just too strong, then you're probably going to feel like a failure. Okay, and that's going to really, diminish your sense of self-efficacy, and it's going to diminish your motivation to want to keep going. So all in all, it sounds like this is kind of like the premise behind my stance of why most people probably should put fat loss or dedicated fat loss expectations and behaviors on the maintenance burner, and rather understand that, it's not a 31-day bender or whatever. We can implement a maintenance dose of calorie conscious habits, a dose that isn't really going to impact social and emotional health and enjoyment throughout the December month.
Yeah. In a summary, fat loss isn't worth it, really, for your
Yes,
social.
that's what I was saying.
for your social, emotional, mental health, any of that kind of stuff, right? I think, again, so we talk about, okay, what does success look like? So we need to define, okay, like what is a goal for December? What is a good goal to have? So I think a great way to think about it is like, what did we do last December, or the December before, or the December before? Like, do you always start January feeling like you've overdone it? Do you always start January feel like you missed out? Do you start January feeling like you've put on 5 kilos, or like, let's say 10 kilos, whatever it might be, like, and use that as a way to measure progress and go, okay, this December, I don't want to put on 5 kilos. If I put on 3 kilos, I'll be happy. You know what I mean? Like, or if I put on 2, like, if we look at weight maintenance as well, weight maintenance is plus minus 3%. So if someone is 69 kilos, then if they hover between 69 and 71 kilos, that's maintenance. You know what I mean? So understanding that as well. So I think using previous years as a way to measure your progress, and to like map out some actions could be really, really helpful. But I think another thing that we can do is, okay, yes, it's not a 31-day bender. You might have like, your Christmas Eve, your Christmas Day, your Boxing Day, your New Year's Eve. You might have some Christmas parties, but let's even say that that's like seven days. There's still
Mhm.
24 days out of the year that you can still have a bit more control over. I'm not saying have dedicated fat loss or track your calories on those days. It's just like maybe just put a bit more focus onto those days, and that's 77% of the month. Now,
Yeah.
I would say that is being pretty adherent. That is pretty
Mm.
consistent. If you are getting 77% in an exam, I'd be pretty stoked. So, like, why not focus a bit more energy on those? And that's what I like to call focus on the in-betweeners. So, in between the social meals, focus a bit more on those.
Yeah, I think you raise a fantastic point, and the actual amount of, I guess, big social occasions in the month of December. It's not every day, it's not every meal. And you should focus on, the things that are within your control. And, whilst we can say, okay, so this is within your control during the occasion, we're forgetting that there is also like the majority of the month that is still completely, like meals that you might have stock standard compared, your normal meals that you would have in any other month. With that being said, I think it's important to say or mention that when we're talking about utilize that opportunity to have a bit more control, some people might be thinking, well, does that mean I should like, restrict to try and like undo the damage, or, keep the average over time, the energy balance over time where it should be, and like, just I will still be in a deficit. And it's like, and this would sort of insinuate the idea of calorie banking. um, or so for, I guess, to kind of explain what that is briefly, having low calories on your non-social meals or your non-social days. So you've got more wiggle room or more room to get away with some excessive indulging on those indulgent days. Now, okay, theoretically, fine idea. Indeed, weight change and what have you is a game of averages over time. So in the month of December, you were interested in, getting to try and maintain your weight as closely as possible. Or, let's say you still thought it was viable to lose weight. Cool. The issue with this is that when you like prior excessive consumption is often fueled by prior restraint. Okay, so that restriction phase, you're getting an increase in food focus, you're getting an increase in hunger, almost to a point where you've got a degree of insatiable hunger. And then just this craving for food freedom. And then this idea of, well, I should reward myself. And there's this occasion coming up tomorrow night, and I'm really excited for it. And there's heaps of anticipation. You show up there ravenous, you're super like edgy, you're a bit hangry because you're like, oh yeah, I've been restricting my calories all day for this. Oh, and then you get there and you just like the floodgates open. And not only have you overconsumed calories to the point where you've compensated for all those calories that you've saved, but you've also not really enjoyed the occasion because food has really occupied the whole thing. It's taken away from the, I guess, attention towards the social component of it, or the emotional health, or whatever component of it. And also, you potentially run into issues with your relationship with food when that happens, namely a binge restrict cycle. And that sort of describes what I mentioned before. You restrict out of guilt almost from binging. Okay, but then that hunger accumulates, that food focus accumulates, that desire for food freedom. And then the anticipation, like I mentioned before, and the floodgates just open. You give them an inch and they take a mile. So yeah, I think that just needs to be mentioned on the side of that. Yes, you can control things a little bit more on those non-social days, but just don't think that that's a good idea. Don't think that it's a good idea that to then restrict to the point where you're trying to still maintain fat loss.
Yeah, it's still about having an approach-based goals on those days. On those days where you have more control, you're still focusing on adding your protein to each meal, your plants to each meal, your hunger-busting snacks. Sorry, for example, if you're still focusing on fueling your training, adding those healthy habits into your life. It's not about on those days I can control myself more, so I'm going to cut out carbs and fats and indulgences. Because one of the analogies that you've used for a long time in this example is that you don't want to end up being like a hungry dog that's been let off its leash, because that's not helpful for anyone. It's not safe for anyone as well. And that's what happens all the time. We go through this really like big bout of like, oh, I'll just eat less on these days. And then you are just so ravenous and so excited that yeah, you don't even enjoy it. You just like look down and go, holy shit, where did those 3 plates of food and 6 beers go? I didn't even notice, didn't even enjoy them. So it actually defeats the purpose. And that's why we're so big on like proactive eating as well. So like eating something before you go to an event so that you aren't so ravenous. Another thing that I want to suggest that we avoid is the earn to burn kind of way of going about things, or like, oh, I can eat this because I exercise. It's a form of like self-justification, or I can eat this because I didn't eat that yesterday. We give ourselves this license to do these things, but like you said, you would have overeaten past the point that you underate the day before. So your energy balance would have been over the top anyway, in that surplus range, or even in a greater surplus than you would have thought. And also, we don't burn as many calories through exercise as we think. So the idea of earning food is pretty silly.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's pretty funny. Just as a bit of a side tangent, I was here working away at the desk yesterday, and this guy yesterday, I overheard talking to his mate. He's like, "Yes, I did this blood test, and I'm not allowed to have carbs on the days I don't train." I'm like, I'm thinking in my head, what blood test is this? And he's like, "Oh, my I don't tolerate them very well." I'm like, what does that mean? What does that mean? So yes, the point I'm trying to make is, yeah, you don't need to worry about cutting out carbs on non-training days, or earning whatever you have. Now, on that note, we are big on unconditional permission to indulge at FNC. But if you are in this state where you've restricted and you've earned the permission to indulge because you've maybe restricted prior, or you've gone through this big exercise thing, or you've created this environment where there's the potential for, high hunger, anticipation, all those things that I mentioned before, then unconditional permission to indulge is probably going to end up looking like something really excessive. So by keeping things a little bit more, I guess, not conservative, but just, not having these huge peaks and troughs, and not thinking like, oh, I've got to earn this or what have you, you're putting yourself in a position where you can trust yourself. You can trust yourself when you say, I'm going to give myself unconditional permission to enjoy Grandma's Christmas pudding.
Yeah, and I think that all like ties in really well with like what we call the FN sweet spot. And it's about like, yeah, find balance and find moderation. But I think that's still quite a vague term. I think if we can put some parameters on there of like, the way I like to go about this is like, ask yourself, what does overindulgence look like at these occasions or this month? But then what does over restriction look like? So is over restriction having no dessert and like no beers with your family and just getting a plate of protein and plants? But does overindulging is that 3 plates and 3 desserts and 20 beers? Okay, let's find the sweet spot. Let's find the middle ground for that. And that is a sign of progress. And hopefully it satisfies that social and the physical components of health at the same time. And I think just going through, like, I think there is so much value in reflection, but also like, yeah, just looking back, but looking forward and actually planning appropriately and having a bit of like a range in mind, rather than just going, oh, I'm just going to be balanced, just going to like eat with balance and moderation, because other people are so influential. And this is where, like, if you are quite a health-seeking person to begin with, and your friends and family maybe aren't, they're going to be the ones that are going to say, oh, just don't worry about it. Just you can have whatever you want. Like, I know I can have whatever I want anytime, and I do have whatever I want, but I think about it and it's in line with my goals and my values. So like, even having an idea of like when to say no and how to say no and why you're saying no can be quite helpful in these situations if you are worried about peer pressure. Because again, I don't think we have to just throw the towel in this month and go, it's a bender, I'm going to eat and drink whatever I want, or even for 2 weeks, I'm going to eat and drink whatever I want. Like, you can still do that, but it doesn't have to be this overindulgence point. And you're just giving into peer pressure from everyone and anyone who says, here, have another drink. Like, do what you want. I think that's what we're trying to get. Like, but actually you need to figure out what you want. So doing what you want doesn't mean doing anything. Doing what you means getting clear on what your goals are, what your values are, and how you want to attack this month, and acting in alignment with that.
So a few things there. Number one, I agree, forward thinking, maybe not forward planning. I don't want to call it forward planning because that for me insinuates you're sitting down here like writing a plan. Not that there's anything wrong with writing a plan. I think, I don't want to kind of put that expectation on people who are listening. I think just forward thinking.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's really a good idea. You know, I've got an occasion tomorrow night, tonight, whatever. Forward thinking, what do I want from that occasion? And where do my values come into that, for example? But also part of that is getting clear on sort of guidelines or targets. And I think it's good to have those rather than just saying, like you said, oh, I want to be balanced. I want to be, you know, moderation. Like, what is moderation? What is balance? So I think some clear cut targets are a good idea, but I don't think those targets should be rigid in nature. I think they should still have an inbuilt degree of flexibility, because when you're in the occasion, you don't know what might happen. It might be the best occasion of your life. You might be single and you meet the guy or girl of your dreams and you're having a great night and you're like, oh, well, like we could be on here, bros. And then you're like, oh, I can justify an extra drink. But then you're like, oh no, but I'm going to go over my target. Oh, all hell breaks loose. And like, you know, you feel really bad, but, you know, I want to have a little bit of flexibility for those situations, you know? Anyhow, so I think that's a really good idea. But really, yeah, the sweet spot, you know, this comes at under the idea that, you know, there is a sweet spot, like a middle road for lots of things in life. And we can learn from life that the middle road approach typically does pretty damn well. Let's take beers, chocolate cake, Messina gelato. You have one scoop, you're feeling great, it's really enjoyable, fantastic. You have two, you're like, okay, that's a bit much, but it was still very enjoyable. And then you have three, you're like, no, this is way too much. The last scoop, I was just eating it because it was there. So there's this point of diminishing returns on enjoyment. And what we're trying to do here is find sweet spot where we're getting the max value for our indulgence spent, the maximum enjoyment return for our indulgent spend. Now, if you were to ask me, when it comes to Messina, what I feel like my sweet spot is, see, it's a tricky one with Messina because one scoop just isn't enough, but two is probably too much. So I wish they did like 1.5. That would be the sweet spot for me anyhow. So yeah, it's about kind of thinking forwards and being like, okay, well, what is, like you said, Josh, what does over restriction look like? What does overindulging look like? What do I think is going to be the sweet spot where I get the maximum return? And, you know, for me, through experience, I've established my Messina sweet spot. But for other indulgences, which I haven't experienced very much or at all, I would have to probably experience that. And it might not go so well, but that's okay because every single experience is a learning opportunity. And, you know, I would be able to reflect upon that and learn for next time, right? Yeah, that's all I'll say for now.
Yeah, again, that like goes back to that reflection aspect of like, yeah, we look forward and plan ahead, but we also look back and think back and like, what would I change? If anything, you might have an amazing, that in that example you had, you might have had a plan to go, I'm going to have only 6 drinks, but then you're on a night out and it turns into 20, but you had the best night of your life. And would you change anything? No. I sent that in an email this morning to the Hero newsletter. Like a really important, powerful question that coaches can ask their clients is this something you want to work on? But if something happens, like, would you change anything about that? So, and if you wouldn't change anything, then don't change it. Like, don't stress about it. If you had an amazing time and like, yeah, you overdid it, but that's okay. Like, I wouldn't change it at all. Then don't worry about it. Don't stress about it. Just move on to the next thing.
Move on to the next thing. Yeah, I agree. And then sort of going like, well, you know, I want to have thinking about the whys. I want to spend time with my friends. I want to hang out with this guy or girl that I've been messaging on Tinder. I want to hang out with my family. I haven't seen them for a year, like whatever it is. So these are your kind of like what you're seeking to get from the occasion. And this can be part of your pre-contemplation, or I like to call it a pre-reflection, even though it's before. I don't know. What are the benefits that I can obtain? What am I trying to obtain from this? Yeah, the preparatory phase. What am I seeking to get from this occasion? What are the benefits? You know, what can I get from it? Okay, so what level of indulging sort of fits within that? Okay, so what are maybe some rough guidelines I can set? And I think also when it comes to the preparation phase, with those guidelines, yeah, I think it's good to have some guidelines in place, like some actual strategies. So, for example, I'm going to have a snack a couple of hours before the occasion to kind of just take the edge off the hunger and the excitement. I'm going to promote proper hydration by, you know, having a tall glass of Diet Coke when the menu comes out and when the food comes out, just to kind of like settle me down a little bit. I'm going to set a target of 3 to 5 beverages or 1 beverage an hour. or maybe I'm going to do a 1-to-1 ratio of non-alcoholic to alcoholic. One cocktail, and then all alcoholic beverages after that are Diet Coke, soda, vodka things, or whatever you call them.
That's your favorite
Kind
drink,
of
isn't
being
it?
a
Vodka
little
Diet
bit
Coke.
like, that's my what drink?
That's your favorite drink, isn't it? Vodka Diet Coke.
It's my signature drink, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Although I don't really drink. So anyway, yeah, kind of just having a little bit of like not a plan, but just kind of like some guidelines to guide you, just reduces that vagueness, like I said before.
Yeah, it's clarity without restriction, I think.
There
Like
you
you're
go,
not,
Josh. Hit the nail on the head. Clarity without restriction.
put it on a
That's a
shirt.
Josh one right there.
Put it on a shirt.
Yes. Make sure you trademark that one for everyone in the fitness industry to start to copy you and make reels about you.
Yeah, what do I say, mate? It's a compliment, but it's a frustrating compliment sometimes. Okay, so I want to take a bit of a direction for how we can help people that might be really nervous about the festive season and enjoying these social meals. And I think there are a number of questions that you can ask yourself if you're watching this or listening to this on the podcast. It's an activity that you can sit down and just be really conscious and thoughtful with. So actually take your time, pause it if you need to. Now, I want you to think about some negative thoughts or emotions that may pop up in regards to enjoying yourself this festive season. And that might look like not tracking your meals on MyFitnessPal. It might look like, you feel like you don't have control over these meals. And that might be causing you a bit of stress and anxiety. Now, I want you to think about now, what is the best possible outcome that could happen from this festive season, and giving up that tracking element on like tracking your meals, or giving yourself permission to enjoy these meals mindfully, and without judgment and without criticism, and being self-compassionate. So what's the best possible outcome? And then think about what is the worst possible outcome. So what do you think would be the absolute worst thing that could happen? And I think people might be a bit exaggerate. They might exaggerate this one and take it a bit too far. They might say, "Oh, I'm going to put on 10 kilos over Christmas." Okay, cool. That's the worst possible outcome, right? Now, what's probably the most realistic thing that could happen, right? You might overdo it. You might put on a couple of kilos, right? But then the next question asked is like, how will you cope, right? How will you cope if the worst happens, or if something mildly negative happens? And then again, what are some mildly possible things that could happen? So you might maintain your weight and really enjoy these social meals. All right. And I think probably one of the more powerful questions you can ask yourself is, what would you say to a friend in a similar situation who is nervous about the festive season, or nervous about social meals, or nervous about not tracking their meals around this time of year? Because we're very good at giving advice to others, especially those that we care about. We're not so good at giving advice to ourselves. I mean, that's a really powerful activity that you can run through. That's going to give you a bit of an idea of like, okay, the worst probably isn't going to happen, but if it does happen, I can cope with it because I have these strategies in place. It's just getting back into regular eating habits. It's not restriction. Okay. And if my friend was really nervous about not tracking their Christmas lunch or Christmas dinner, here's what I would say to them. And then that final question is like, what do you think you should do with that information? And what actions do you think you can take?
Yeah, I think you highlight a really key thing, which is, you probably are going to slip up throughout the month of December, especially if you're someone who doesn't have much confidence around your abilities to be controlled in the month of December. But with that, like if you do slip up and you're someone who's hypervigilant about nutrition and not overdoing, you might have just finished a fat loss phase, or you might have had past experiences where you've rebounded, and of course it's really natural to be concerned. What will happen after the diet? What will happen in the month of December? Am I going to undo all of the hard work, sort of thing? Sorry, that's motorbike. It's completely normal, but what I would suggest you do as well is when you're reflecting upon those occasions and those, even if you want to call it a slip up, firstly, recognize that, you don't want to catastrophize it. And it's very easy to catastrophize things, and try to praise the meal or the occasion or whatever first on its positives. Okay. So rather than going straight to, oh, I overindulged, I had too many beers or whatever, I had too much Messina. Go, well, it brought me social enjoyment. I had a great time with my friends. We haven't caught up for a year. And first start with the positives. But then when it comes to, contemplating the areas of slip up, if you will, remember that, you can learn from those experiences. So that's one positive thing you can get from it. But also, to avoid catastrophizing it and blowing it out of proportion, you can use the 10-10-10 strategy. So how will I feel in, 10 minutes, 10 days? I always get them mixed up, like years, days, but you get the point. And then you can kind of put things into perspective, and you realize that actually, like, in 10 years, I'm going to be thankful that I enjoyed that social occasion, and I'm not really going to care that I went a little bit over with the beers. It's not going to be at all detrimental to my long-term health. And one more thing that I want to add to that is that I think the hyper vigilant folks about not gaining weight will expect, like, have this target of my weight has to be maintained, like, to the T. Like, it can't fluctuate, maybe like a small fluctuation. But it's funny because, well, it's not funny. Weight maintenance occurs across a range. It's not a fixed value. And it even occurs across a range of body fat masses. Christmas period might come, you might gain a little bit of body fat, but then naturally you're a little bit tired of the social occasions, your appetite is really low. So in January, you might naturally tend to eat less. So it balances itself out naturally, right? And, but all because weight has maybe increased by a kilo or two in December and then dropped back down, does this mean that throughout the month of December, you weren't in a weight maintenance mode? You could make the argument, but I would disagree with it. I would say that, well, actually, weight maintenance, like I said, it's this fluctuating dynamic thing. You're still within the range. So that's another thing I think is worth considering, is not setting a hard and fast target of my weight must stay at this or within this very tight range, and understanding that maintenance occurs across a range of values.
Yeah. And again, I think we go back to what we said at the start. Like, you can't control your body weight. No matter how much you think you can't actually control your body weight. You can control your food and exercise, right? That influences your body weight, but you can't actually control the number that you are going to be on a certain day or for a certain period. It is going to fluctuate. So, like, again, just like, I don't know, like that kind of thing. I don't really like numbers-based goals anyway when it comes to a body weight. You're not a fighter, you're not a weightlifter. You don't have you don't need to have a body weight goal anyway. That frustrates me in the first place. But I just wanted to mention, we mentioned before slip-ups. Now, I don't like the term off and on track and slip up sometimes when it's about a social meal, because if we look at the purpose of that individual meal, it was to be enjoyed with our friends and family. So it doesn't need to be classed as a slip up, because so much, like, we so often like to zoom in and just judge our diet based on one meal or one instance, or this meal was indulgent. Yes, it was high calorie, but what other benefits did it bring you? Like you said, highlight all of those positives. So was it even a slip up in the first place? I don't think so. Zoom out and look at the big picture, big perspective. But another thing is that if you then set yourself some goals and some targets and habits to focus on in the month of December, that's all you should focus on, right? Don't stress about the slip ups, if that's what you want to call them, because they weren't even a focus. Anyway, you were focusing on having 3 meals a day. You were focusing on still trying to have some fruit every day. You were still focusing on trying to drink X amount of water or drink to hydration, even when you are drinking some alcohol. Those were your focus points. You were still focusing on trying to go for a walk and eat mindfully. They were the things you were focusing on. You weren't even focusing on everything else. So why would you call it a slip up if you weren't focusing on it? I know that's just me got a bit of a rant and tangent.
No, I hear you. I definitely hear you. For me, I feel like, a slip up in the mind of people, I guess, in this volatile situation, is a slip up is going to be anything that kind of they feel like was mindless or excessive or beyond those guidelines that are set. And this is one reason why I think the guidelines should have a degree of flexibility in them. But also, I think that in a lot of instances, the expectations are too high, and the expectations also fail to consider the things that you mentioned before, the things that you were focusing on, like still doing movement at your other meal, still eating protein and plants, still considering portion sizes and all these sort of things. When you take those into account and consider the bigger picture, like you said, when you zoom out, is an extra scoop of Messina or an extra beer really it might be a slip up in the sense of, well, it was beyond my targets or my guidelines that I set of myself. But then that could also be argued as well. But if that's beside the point. If you were to look at the day as a whole, or even the weekend or even week as a whole, it's not a slip up, because, you have to consider the positive things that you did well. For example, like the examples that you mentioned before.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you have to do that before you go and slap a slip up label on it.
Yeah.
But also remembering that even if it was a full-blown slip up, this isn't always a negative thing. I don't think that this should be viewed as a threat, and rather it can be used to draw positives. Like, you can't learn unless you experience. Like, you can watch all the YouTube videos about how to drive a manual car. You can read the manual, like the book manual on it. But unless you actually sit in a freaking manual car, you're never going to learn how to drive it. You got to, actually do it. So I think there's a big part of that here when it comes to social occasion control and finding a sweet spot.
Yeah, and it comes like, what would you change, if anything, about that? If you had your time again, what would you change? So it's like, wins, learns, improvements, maybe, like, you WLI, just use that as a reflection.
WLI.
That's it. Put it on a shirt. Trademark. Josh Smith.
Put it on a shirt. Yeah, trademark. You hear that? You
Yeah.
hear that, people on Instagram? You hear that?
Yeah, yeah. And also, like, there's nothing wrong with, like, going, I did indulge. I did it. I went over the top, and I wouldn't change it. And that's okay. Yeah. I think that's actually a pretty cool thing.
Cool.
All right, so I think, like, if we start to wrap up, unless there's anything else you wanted to mention, I think the real key thing is to, like manage your expectations. Like, don't have them so high, but actually still have some. Like, again, don't just it's not all or nothing. It's not like I can't try.
Like that, bro.
Yeah, it's like, okay, you can still do something. Focus on doing something, like on the days in between the social events, but even on the days, like, what can you still do? Think about what you want to get out of December and how you need to act, but having a set of guidelines. So not being too strict, have clarity without restriction. So be quite flexible, but then just really reflect afterwards. Think about the night, think about the day, think about the weeks. What did you enjoy? What did you get out of that? Did you make some awesome memories? Did you have an epic time? Did you enjoy some meals? Okay. And then, would you change anything, if anything?
Yeah, I really like those questions of reflection. But just to add one more point, I think a big part of, like, success, what is success in terms of, like, did I nail this social occasion? That sort of came up. I think a lot of it is, well, you define success on your own. I think setting those expectations is a big deal, because it can mean the difference between I nailed it versus I failed and I'm a failure. And obviously we don't want to create negativity or shame. We don't want to diminish self-efficacy. So this brings in the idea of the diet dimmer knob, assessing the upcoming situation or the present situation, and then being like, okay, well, I need to adjust my expectations from, like, I guess, calorie conscious nutrition perspective, and accept that maybe I won't be able to hit my plan targets. Maybe there will be indulgences and potentially, what would be deemed excessive by usual weekday indulgence standards. So setting those expectations from the get-go, I feel, is like a big part of this, because it really shapes how you view or reflect upon a social occasion. So from the onset, having viable expectations that align with not only, the present circumstance, but also what you're trying to get from the occasion. Like, if its primary role is to offer, social benefits, and it's a really, it's a really sort of important one, then you would want to sort of take trade-offs away from optimal health seeking, calorie conscious, whatever nutrition, because you're going to be getting all those other benefits. And therefore you would want to set those expectations at a level that doesn't diminish the benefits or interfere with your ability to attain those benefits. Yeah, but also doesn't set you up for failure.
Yeah, I think a really important part of the diet dividend process is to define what each level is. So define what your 10 out of 10 is, define what your 0 out of 10 is. And if you're a 3 out of 10, okay, what are you doing on the day where you're a 3 out of 10? And then use that and go, okay, last December, what was I, a 0 out of 10? Okay, how can I act on with being a 3 out of 10? And is it just having like, okay, three meals, drinking some water and, being physically active? Like, is it something like that? Like, what is your 3 out of 10? But know that that's like, if that's all you can give, that's still heaps better than a 0. You don't have to
100%.
you don't have to aim for 10 out of 10 because, again, you're starting January in a better place physically and mentally by doing something rather than doing nothing.
100%. If you're a 3 out of 10, as opposed to a 10 out of 10, come January, whatever, mid-January or whatever, you're going to be far better off, and it was worth it, than if you just wrote the whole thing off completely. And yeah, I think that's an issue with that all or nothing mindset. People think like, oh, it's December, social season. It's this like on or off the bandwagon or track. It's just like, I don't know about you, Josh, but in the world of nutrition, I've never seen a railroad road track anywhere. I've never observed this phenomenon.
Nah,
Where is it?
I hate that word off track, man.
This on off track. I've never seen it. So I don't know where these comments I'm off track come from. Seriously. Yeah.
Yeah. And it just makes you feel so shit about your other meals that were off track when they had a purpose. Like, they can be part, like, if we're going to use the track analogy, make them part of your track.
Or adjust the track to suit them.
Yeah. Fuck, yeah. Anyway, that's another podcast in itself that we could probably do in February, because I'm sure that January will be dedicated towards how to tackle your nutrition in January when people are trying to get started. Mate, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I had some, but I think I forgot them.
That's right, mate. You haven't had a coffee today. I understand. Just make sure that all the listeners know and all the viewers know that Mac hasn't had a coffee today.
I haven't had a coffee, everyone. Just let you know.
And it didn't affect your performance. Maybe coffee's a placebo. Maybe coffee doesn't even work. Maybe
the research on the ergogenic positive impacts of caffeine are fake.
Yeah.
Maybe it's all a hoax, smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, mate. Science is smoke and mirrors. All right. If you have any questions about or would like some more guidance about how to tackle nutrition in December and find that sweet spot between overindulgence and over restriction, and I guess really eat in along with your values and what's most important to you, and you want to start January on the front foot, then send us a message, send us an email, send us a DM on Instagram, whatever it might be. We do have a few spots available for coaching. You can get started now still, right? Or you can put your name down to start in January, right? You can confirm your spot. We only have limited spots available. So if you want to make sure that you are, part of Team FNC and working with one of our experienced coaches to help you, I guess, really just live your best life. That's what I would say. Then yeah, just reach out to us, head to our either Instagram or our website. Thank you. Thanks, Mac, for joining me today.
Thank you very much, Joshua, and to the listeners. Thank you for giving us your time today. Have a good one.